We've learned to replicate things at incredible speed. But do we still remember how to create something truly unprecedented? If every education system teaches you to follow a process, every investor asks if anyone else is already doing it, and every startup advice encourages you to start with what's easy, what's left for those who want to create something that has never existed? Is there still room for an idea that goes against the current? One not born from data, not validated by others, and with no proof of concept beyond your deepest intuition. If you can't win by improving the old, perhaps you must abandon that game entirely to build a completely different one, where the first to arrive is the winner. The question is no longer how to succeed, but what kind of success is truly worth pursuing. If you're merely treading the path of others, this book isn't about running faster. It asks why you're running in the same direction as the crowd in the first place. This is an invitation for those weary of repetition, who are beginning to suspect that the future cannot truly be born from imitation. Now let's begin summarizing this book. If I asked you what is true, a great truth that almost no one agrees with you on, how would you answer? I've asked that question hundreds of times, each time an interview, a deep dive into a person's brain and courage. That question seems simple, but it's actually the first threshold to determine who has the ability to create something new and who lives in the shadow of the old world. One person answered, "Our education system has major problems." Perhaps true, but also trivial. Everyone has said that. Another claimed there is no God again, a universal proposition amidst endless, meaningless debates. I wasn't looking for grand declarations. I was looking for those who could see something others couldn't. I call it a contrarian truth, something the majority of the world believes is false, while you see that why is the truth. The correct answer would silence the listener because it not only goes against the grain, but it is so undeniably true that it cannot be refuted, even if no one dares to say it. That question isn't a wordplay. It's the foundation for how I view the future and how I've lived investing, failing, and rebuilding over the past 20 years in the startup world. The future isn't just a series of tomorrows repeating today with a few adjustments. If it's truly the future, it must be different, radical, even strange. If you think the future is a place where everything will be copied from what's already known, you're living in an illusion of expansion. But if you realize that everything significant in history began from a breakthrough, from scratch, then you understand why I call this book 0 to 1 asterisk. There's a profound difference between going from 1 to n and from 0 to 1. When you go from 1 to n, you expand what already exists, building more houses, cloning stores, accelerating processes. But from 0 to 1, you create what's never existed. You don't go further, you veer completely off the old path. You don't grow, you revolutionize. You can replicate hundreds of typewriters. That's 1 to n, but when you create the word processor, something that changes how people communicate, store, and shape language, you've gone from 0 to 1. That's not easy. Most people fear creation, fear the new, and especially fear being different. But I've lived long enough to know that copying will make you drift with the crowd, while creating will give you a reason to exist. I look at China, a superpower of replication at lightning speed. There, everything is mimicked from the West: railways, skyscrapers, consumer goods, even cities. China is going from 1 to n on a massive scale, but that's not enough. Copying can create wealth, but it will suffocate the world if creativity is absent. Imagine if 1.4 billion Chinese people lived exactly like Americans, each with an air conditioner, a car, a consumer lifestyle. This planet would burn in less than a generation. No, I'm not pessimistic. I'm simply not naive. I believe in technology, not as a new toy, but as the only means to push humanity to a higher level. Technology, in its deepest sense, isn't just software or hardware. It's any method that helps us do more with less, helps us live differently. But there's a cruel paradox. Even though technology is the only thing that can save us from boring repetition, very few people are actually creating it. Our parents once dreamed of a brilliant future: houses on the moon, flying cars, working 4 days a week. But they were disappointed because they thought these things would happen on their own. And then they grew old in a world where only the internet truly changed everything else. Roads, education, energy, politics all remained stagnant. Not because no one was intelligent, but because too many intelligent people chose the safe path. Working in large corporations, following processes, fearing mistakes, fearing deviation, fearing loss. I once studied at Stanford, a school full of brilliant people. But most brilliant students didn't know what to do with their brilliance. They studied to prepare for an unnamed something, an unclear job, a vague future brilliant but directionless. I didn't accept that. I taught an entrepreneurship class, not to impart formulas. I don't believe in startup guidebooks. I believe in first principles thinking, something that can strip away every pattern and re-ask questions from the ground up. One of my students, Masters, took meticulous notes of the lectures. Those notes were shared more widely than I imagined, and they were the seed for this book. And I want this to be clear: 0 to 1 asterisk is not a startup textbook. It's a manifesto, a call to action, a reminder that if you want to build the future, you must dare to think alone, dare to believe in secrets, and dare to bet everything on what others haven't seen. That's how I've lived, how I've invested, and how I saw PayPal, Palantir, and Facebook, not by luck, but by believing in contrarian truths. I want to tell you a small story. In 2001, I sat in a meeting with a group of young students. One of them, full of enthusiasm, said, "We're going to build a better search engine than Google." I asked, "How many people in the world are thinking the same thing?" He laughed, "Thousands, probably." I nodded, saying softly, "Then perhaps you're going from 1 to N. The scary thing isn't doing something that already exists. The scary thing is not realizing you're doing it." The current world doesn't lack smart people, but it desperately lacks people who dare to be different. And the paradox is, the smarter they are, the more they fear deviating from the crowd. They are trained to compete, to win, to be right, but not to question. I want you to imagine this. Suppose you could choose one technology to develop for the future of humanity. What would you choose? Not easy to answer, right? We live in an era where imagination is shaped by what currently exists. You can see hundreds of different food delivery apps, but very few are thinking about how to change how we digest food or how to generate energy without eating. We only change the shell, not the essence. I'm not saying this with a tone of disapproval. I say it with deep sadness, because I know that within every person alive today, there is creative potential locked away by education, by society, by prejudice, and worst of all, by the very fear of failure. I used to be afraid when I was a law student. I thought the best path was to become a Supreme Court lawyer. I almost achieved it but was rejected. At that moment, I thought the world had collapsed. It was much later that I understood. If I had succeeded, I might have spent my life writing contracts instead of writing software. That failure saved me. You see, society will praise you if you are good in asterisk their asterisk way. But the world doesn't need more conformists, it needs redefiners. And that never comes from rote learning. Now let's return to the opening question. What is an important truth that very few people agree with you on? Here's my answer. Most people think the future of the world will be determined by globalization. But the truth is, the future will be determined by technology. I believe that with my whole life. Because if you merely copy old methods globally, you will also copy mistakes, crises, pollution, and injustice. Only technology, in its deepest sense, is the lever for humanity to leap out of that vicious cycle. Look back. From 1914 to 1971, technology exploded, but globalization stalled. After 1971, globalization accelerated, but technology merely repeated itself, with few exceptions. Since then, we haven't had a true revolution in energy, healthcare, transportation, or education. And the danger is that people are starting to forget that the world once changed dramatically. They assume stagnation is normal. No, that's not normal. The world asterisk can asterisk change, but it doesn't change because more people work harder. It changes because someone sees what doesn't exist and believes it can be created. Someone once asked me, "Peter, do you think Elon Musk is crazy for wanting to put humans on Mars?" I answered, "Yes, and I know he'll do it." Because only those who dare to be logically insane can change the world. Technology doesn't come from an anonymous lab. It doesn't fall from the sky. It comes from real people living with ideas that the rest of the world calls absurd. Every true startup is a gamble on a secret something only a small group dares to believe in and act upon. Entrepreneurship, therefore, isn't about making money. It's about rediscovering an individual's courage to be different. You can live like most people, following well-trodden paths, or you can be the first to dare set foot on a path without a map. If you don't believe there are still secrets, you won't look for them. But if you believe this world still holds many undiscovered things, you will start looking around with different eyes. And that is the first step of a company, of a life, of a new future. Chapter: Unrestricted Partying. When the bubble inflated, no one felt it, but when it burst, all of Silicon Valley smelled it. I was in the midst of that craze in the late 1990s. The tech world was like an endless party overflowing with wine, money, and illusions. Product launches looked like fashion shows, and every investment promise began with 3 words: "We will be." At that time, people didn't ask how much you were making, they asked, "Have you IPO'd yet?" As if the concept of profit was an ancient language. The more a company lost money, the more it was praised for investing in the future. I wasn't outside that party, I was in it. I ran PayPal during a period when insane optimism was the accepted currency. We once believed we could create a new currency independent of governments, running entirely on the internet. That goal sounded arrogant, but at least it was real. It wasn't a pump and dump scheme. I still clearly remember one day, sitting in a living room with another startup founder. He said, "I've prepared my IPO speech, even though the company isn't fully formed yet." And he said it with a straight face, as if talking about weekend vacation plans. When the market peaked, people started dancing as if the music would never stop. But the music always stops, and when it stops, not everyone finds a seat. In 2000, the dot-com bubble burst. The Nasdaq index plummeted from 5,000 to just over 1,000. Hundreds of companies vanished, billions of dollars evaporated as if they had never existed. But what left a lasting impact was not the financial loss, but the lessons, the post-crisis doctrines that became guiding principles for every entrepreneur. Afterward, 4 main dogmas emerged from that collapse. 1. Don't dream big, grow incrementally. 2. Don't plan, be agile. 3. Don't create a market, improve what already exists. 4. Don't sell, let the product speak for itself. They sounded very logical, both safe and wise, but they were also like the advice of someone who had just been dumped bitter and without faith in relationships. The reality is, it wasn't because startups back then dreamed big that they failed. They failed because their dreams weren't specific enough, they lacked foundations. And so, the paradox is that the opposite principles were actually more correct. 1. Dream big, but be brave enough to execute step by step. 2. Plans can be wrong, but no plan is suicide. 3. Competition is a trap, seek out untouched markets. 4. Good products don't sell themselves, good sales create breakthroughs. When I recall that period, I don't feel regret. I see it as necessary. The late 90s were a form of collective intoxication. Everyone looked at the future through a shiny but hazy crystal ball. I saw the smartest people flocking to companies with unclear business models. They used money to burn money. They used media to exaggerate reality, and they used hope instead of logic. I wasn't an outsider. I was also caught in that belief. But amidst the party, I saw one thing. We were all dancing in a room with no exit, and if PayPal wanted to survive, we had to find the door sooner than others. We once paid new users $10 for each sign-up, and another $10 if they invited friends. Sounds crazy, right? It was. But that was the only way to grow users quickly when no one knew who you were. Costs increased exponentially, but we accepted it because new users were oxygen. Without them, everything would die. We knew this model wasn't sustainable, but it bought us time, and in the startup world, sometimes time is all you need to find a sustainable model. We also knew the market was about to collapse, and so we acted fast, very fast. In May 2000, a Wall Street Journal article said PayPal could be worth $500 million. A month later, we raised $100 million. $1 investor valued us directly based on the article. A Korean company sent $5 million without signing a single piece of paper. A week later, the bubble burst. If we had slowed down even for a few weeks, PayPal might have been just another name on the list of defunct companies from 2000. But we survived. And that wasn't because of luck, but because we were sober amidst the intoxication. You can't fight the crowd by opposing them. You can only surpass them by thinking differently. You have to ask yourself, is what I believe merely a reaction to past pain, or is it a truly tested conviction? Because if you let the past define the present, you cannot build the future. People often say you learn from failure, but the truth is we often learn the wrong lessons from failure. After the dot-com bubble burst, a new generation of startups formed like abandoned children, fearful, skeptical, cautious of anything that hinted at dreaming big. Anyone who mentioned vision was considered delusional. Anyone who spoke of changing the world was suspected of being a scammer. Be realistic became the official slogan of the startup world. So, people began to worship the opposite of past mistakes, and that was a new mistake. They believed that working small was safer, that small steps would take you further than a big leap. But no one bothered to look back and see one thing: those who took big leaps and failed did so because they leaped incorrectly, not because they dreamed too much, but because they dreamed without knowing what they were dreaming about. The death of Petscom wasn't because they sold pet supplies online, but because they didn't understand their operating model, couldn't control costs, and didn't grasp the customer life cycle. In other words, they lacked strategy. They had a website, a cute mascot, some expensive Super Bowl ads, and that was all. I witnessed an entire industry follow the trend of building mobile credit card reader apps. First came Square, a clever name with a product that arrived at the right time. Afterward, competitors emerged one by one. One company made a round reader, another a crescent shape, another a triangle. A geometry contest disguised as innovation. No one asked why credit cards had to be read in this shape and not another. Did any shape even matter? They weren't trying to find the essence, they were just chasing the form, because form is easier than essence. I call that competition disguised as innovation. You see, when you compete, you don't create. You only slightly improve what already exists. You get sucked into a game where others set the rules, and you forget that the game only matters if you chose it in the first place. I've lived long enough in the startup ecosystem to realize a hard truth. Most entrepreneurs don't do it because they believe in something, but because they don't want to lose the game. They don't fight against the current, they try to swim faster than the person next to them. But in the world of ideas, swimming fast isn't enough. You have to swim differently. I once saw two startups just a few blocks apart. On one side was the company I co-founded, Confinity, with PayPal. On the other was XCOM, founded by Elon Musk. We competed fiercely. Both burned millions of dollars to attract users, and I'm not afraid to say we were once at war. An engineer on my team even suggested building a logic bomb to attack the competitor's system. The idea was never carried out, but it shows how competition can make people lose control. We couldn't continue like that. And then one day, Elon and I met at a cafe amidst the dot-com frenzy. Two mortal enemies decided to merge. PayPal and XCOM became one. We learned an important lesson. It's better to combine forces to create something truly powerful than to be divided and die together. Since then, I no longer believe in competition. I believe in monopoly in the most positive sense of the word. Monopoly isn't about stifling competitors. It's about creating something so different that no one can compare it. Competition is like war. The winner also suffers losses, the loser vanishes, and most importantly, both lose the opportunity to create something no one has ever seen. I know some readers will find this uncomfortable. They'll think, but if everyone goes their own way, the world will be chaotic. No, on the contrary, the world is only chaotic when everyone crowds onto the same path. Look at schools. From elementary to university, they teach you how to excel in the same game exams, grades, degrees. Then, upon graduation, they tell you, now be creative. But creativity isn't a skill. It's a choice, a difficult choice, because it means you'll be ridiculed, misunderstood, isolated. If you plan to start a company, don't begin by asking, who will I compete with? Begin by asking, how will I be so different that no one can place me on the same scale? You won't build a great company by beating others. You'll only build it if you dare to be the first to do something without asking permission. Amidst all the noise, there are still people searching for something real. And if you're reading this, perhaps you're one of them. We need people like you, not to compete, but to create, not to follow the crowd, but to build a new world. Chapter: All Happy Companies Are Different. I once read a line in the novel Anna Karenina that has haunted me ever since. All happy families are alike, each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. That sounds nice, but I think the opposite is true in the business world. All happy companies are different, while failing companies are all alike. They all fail to escape competition. You see, business success doesn't come from being slightly better than others. It comes from being unlike anyone else. I know this sounds counterintuitive. We grew up in a culture that deifies competition. From school to sports, from college entrance exams to startups, everywhere tells you to fight, to excel, to defeat your opponents. But I ask you, if you're fighting in a crowded market, how can you win without destroying yourself? Competition turns you into a pale imitation of yourself. You no longer think about the customer, you think about the competitor. Every decision is based on what the other person is doing, not what you want. I've seen this happen for over a decade in investing and starting companies. When a company starts talking too much about market share, direct competitors, cheaper prices, faster delivery, I know they're playing the wrong game. Great companies don't define themselves by comparison. They define themselves by a unique vision. You might argue, but what about Amazon? They compete ruthlessly and still succeed. True, but did you see Amazon wanting to compete, or were they forced to compete? Jeff Bezos didn't say, "I want to beat Barnes and Noble." He said, "I want to be the most customer-centric company in the world." This is completely different. I believe that every successful long-term company holds a secret that others don't know or understand. It's a monopoly. Not a government-protected monopoly, but a natural monopoly thanks to a product, technology, vision, or network that others cannot copy. When you have a monopoly, you don't need to shout. You don't need insane price reductions. You don't need to throw money at advertising as if there's no tomorrow. You just need to do what you do well, and the world will come to you. I recall the early days of PayPal. At that time, every online payment company was competing to attract users through eBay because sellers there needed to transfer money. But we didn't do it their way. We didn't try to offer cheaper fees. We created a smooth, fast, unobstructed experience. And specifically, we understood eBay's culture. The sellers there were small individuals, not businesses. They needed to feel trusted, and we built our system around that. As a result, almost all eBay sellers chose to use PayPal, even though there were other cheaper solutions, because we were the right fit not just cheaper. And when you dominate a niche market, you don't just survive, you thrive. But there's a strange truth. Companies often hide the fact that they're monopolies. Why? Because everyone fears government attention. So monopolies pretend to have competition, while competitive companies pretend to be monopolies. Seriously. Google is a prime example. When they IPO'd, they claimed to occupy only a small fraction of the information search market, including print newspapers, email, websites, television, etc., to make their market share seem tiny. In reality, in the online search market, they already held over 90% and no one could catch up. Conversely, a local pizza shop often introduces itself as completely different from every pizza you've ever eaten. But they're still just one of hundreds of pizza shops, meaning they're not special at all. Do you see the paradox? Those who genuinely have no competition pretend they do, while those struggling in competition pretend they don't. Why is this? Because both understand one thing: if you're identified as a monopoly, you'll be hated. But if you're not a monopoly, you'll be devoured. A true monopoly is a company that creates value and captures it, not just a company that creates buzz. But how do you know if you're on the right track? I usually look at 4 foundational elements. 1. Proprietary technology. A jump in performance, not 10%, but 10 times better. If you're only slightly better, others will catch up faster than you think. But if you're 10 times superior, you set a new standard, naturally making competition obsolete. 2. Network effects. The more users your product has, the more valuable it becomes to the next user. A classic example, Facebook. Initially, it was just Harvard students, then it spread to Ivy League schools, then across the US. At some point, if you weren't on Facebook, you were excluded from society. Not because Facebook was the best, but because it was everywhere. 3. Economies of scale. As you grow, your marginal costs approach zero. Software is the perfect example. You incur the cost of writing code once, then sell it to millions of people with almost no additional cost. The bigger you are, the cheaper you become. And cheaper means you can swallow the market. 4. Strong brand. A brand isn't a logo, it's a promise. A company like Apple can sell phones for $1,000 because people aren't buying technology, they're buying a feeling, an identity, self-affirmation. But for all of the above to happen, you need one crucial thing, something many people overlook. You must start with a small market. Don't begin by wanting to do everything for everyone. That sounds grand but is empty. When you say, my market is 100 million people, you're actually saying, I don't know who I'm serving yet. A small market, but served thoroughly, can be a springboard to dominating a large market. Amazon started by only selling books. Facebook started only for Harvard students. PayPal started only for transferring money to eBay sellers. We didn't try to expand before we controlled. When you try to expand too early, you spread out like foam, attractive but hollow. But if you capture a small corner and make yourself indispensable there, you earn the right to expand. People often fear small markets because they think small means less money. But the truth is, a small market you control completely is better than a large market where you are anonymous. I call this the path of secrets. And I believe every good startup begins with a secret. Not a secret of conspiracy or trickery, but a perspective, a truth, a void that the rest of the world hasn't seen or hasn't believed enough to act upon. True secrets always hide behind the wall of the obvious. The world sees the wall, the founder sees the passage. I'm not talking about good ideas, I'm talking about a vision that is true but not yet popular. A vision that needs time to be proven but is strong enough for you to commit all your energy from the very beginning when no one believes you. I once asked a young founder, what do you think will make your company irreplaceable? He was silent for a long time, then said, because we make better products. I nodded and said, bad news. Better isn't enough. You have to be so different that no one can replace you, even if they copy. To do that, you must refuse to be defined by the crowd. Don't start a company because someone tells you to. Don't choose a market because it's hot. Don't follow a formula. Formulas create stability, not unicorns. And above all, don't measure success by attention. Every failing company I've ever seen has one thing in common. They cared too much about being talked about. The most successful companies, on the other hand, are often quiet, persistent, contained in modest rooms with a small group of people who believe in something the world doesn't yet believe. I've lived through 2 decades of startups, and I tell you this. Success isn't noisy. It's the result of internal clarity. If you know you're different, you don't need to shout. You just need to do it right, do it enough. And when the world discovers it, it will be too late to catch up. Chapter: The Ideology of Competition. I grew up in a world where everyone believed one thing: competition is good. From our earliest years, we were taught that competition builds character, drives progress, and enhances productivity. Schools organized contests. Businesses ran campaigns to exceed targets. Nations compared GDPs, military strengths, Olympic medals. We grew up with a win or lose mentality, and we even prided ourselves on it. But there's one thing very few people talk about. Competition doesn't make you better, it makes you lose your mind. I've seen it, not in books, but in my own flesh and blood. When you fall into a competitive battle, you start defining success by others. You look left, you look right, but you forget to look within. All motivation no longer comes from personal conviction, but from the desire to defeat someone. I was once a victim of that ideology. In my youth, I competed in chess. I was once ranked among the top 10 in the US as a teenager. Every game was a tense battle. I learned to anticipate my opponent's intentions, exploit weaknesses, set traps, and most importantly, not to be soft-hearted. Chess taught me discipline, but it also instilled in me a distorted belief. To win, others must lose. I carried that belief into college, law school, and Wall Street, where everything was a numbers game. For every law school applicant, there were only a few positions. For every investment deal, only one party made a killing. For every startup, only one winner. But then, after a while, I realized something very strange. The smartest people I knew were mostly using their intellect to fight in games they hadn't created. They were intelligent, hardworking, disciplined, but they weren't creative. They didn't ask asterisk why they had to play that game. They just wanted to win. Because winning was the only reward they were taught to desire. So they flocked to the same companies, the same industries, the same lifestyles. The best Stanford graduates didn't dream of being founders. They dreamed of being Google employees because Google meant they had already won. As for me, I veered off course. Not because I was wise, but because I couldn't stand the feeling of constantly playing a game whose reward no longer appealed to me. I didn't want to beat anyone. I wanted to build something. And I wanted to ask, is it possible to live a life not trapped in the operating system of competition? When I invested, I started to notice a clear pattern. The best founders didn't care about competitors. They didn't display false confidence. They were calm. They didn't say, "I'm going to eat X's market share." They said, "I'm doing something no one else is doing." Conversely, those who talked too much about competitors, counter-strategies, and competitive advantages often just repeated what they read in McKinsey reports. They were products of an education system that emphasized being better than others, rather than being different asterisk. I call that the ideology of competition, a kind of disguised religious belief where you are taught to grab attention, fame, and money by beating others, rather than by creating new value. It's not just present in business, it permeates every layer of society. You aren't allowed to live the way you want because others are living this way. You aren't allowed to choose the job you like because that profession has limited promotion opportunities. Every decision becomes a reaction to society instead of a deliberate action. You can't build a company or a life that way. I once spoke with a young, energetic founder, his voice brimming with excitement. He had launched a food delivery app and bragged to me, "We're going to beat all other apps by delivering 5 minutes faster and offering 10% lower prices." I asked, "What then?" He fell silent. I don't blame him because that's what the market teaches. A little better, a little cheaper, a little faster, and you'll win. But the truth is, that alone won't let you survive long. When you compete on price, the next person will compete on an even lower price. When you compete on speed, others will burn money to deliver faster. And so, you fall into a spiral of attrition. That kind of competition doesn't create value. It merely transfers value from the company to the user until the company has nothing left to live on. Take the airline industry as an example. Passengers love to complain about airlines' cramped seats, bad food, terrible service. But few realize that airlines haven't made money for decades. The gross profit of the entire U.S. airline industry is almost zero. Why? Because of fierce competition, because there's no differentiation, because everyone offers the same thing a seat on a plane so users choose based on the lowest price. And so, each airline has to cut costs to the bone. Conversely, look at Google. They have the most expensive advertising in the world because they have no true competitors in search. When you hold a reasonable monopoly, you don't need to fight, you just need to exist. Another example, PayPal. In the early days, we competed with Elon Musk's XCOM. Both offered email money transfer services. Both burned money like crazy to acquire users. I once stayed up all night trying to figure out how to make our interface half a second faster, so users would choose us instead of them. At some point, I realized we were destroying ourselves. It wasn't XCOM bringing us down, but our obsession with them that made us lose direction. No one on the team talked about customers anymore. Everyone only talked about competitors. We had to stop, had to choose, continue competing to the death, or merge. And we chose the latter. That's why PayPal exists today. I'm not saying you should always avoid competition. Sometimes it's unavoidable. But you must actively choose the game, not be sucked into a game set by others. When you spend your whole life trying to win, you forget to ask, "What am I playing for?" Competition is a reaction. Creation is an action. Competition makes you look around. Creation makes you look within. Competition makes you like everyone else. Creation makes you irreplaceable. And the most terrifying thing about competition isn't that you'll lose, but that even if you win, you won't get anywhere. Because in the end, you're simply the best version among a crowd of identical people. And in a world filled with copies, that's nothing to be proud of. If you find yourself living to beat others, stop. Ask yourself, what would happen if I didn't try to win, but tried to create something that others couldn't catch up to? That's not arrogance, that's freedom. Chapter: The Advantage of the Last Mover. The first to arrive is often celebrated. Pioneers are always associated with titles like trailblazer, game changer, visionary ahead of their time. Inspirational stories, articles, presentations on brightly lit stages all honor them. But then one day you realize something strange. Many of those pioneers have vanished. They didn't die loudly. They simply faded away, replaced, forgotten, and sometimes trampled upon by lattercomers who were quieter, more persistent, and understood the game better. I once believed that speed was everything. Being ahead of others was an undeniable advantage. But then I lived long enough to see that being first can sometimes be a curse, and the latecomer, if sober enough, can win the final victory sustainably and coldly. Let me tell you about a name almost no one remembers: MITS. In 1975, MITS created the Altair 8800, the world's first commercial personal computer. They were not only ahead of Apple, but also ahead of the very concept of personal computer in consumers' minds. But then, not long after, MITS vanished like a drizzle. The Altair became a memory in a technology museum. No one used it anymore, no one mentioned it anymore. Meanwhile, Microsoft, a fledgling company at the time, only provided software for them. They weren't trailblazers. They didn't build the machine, they just wrote code. But they survived, they held on, they waited for their time. And when the time was ripe, they jumped to center stage. They didn't need to be first, they were the last ones standing. I call that the advantage of the last mover. It's not flashy, it doesn't get applause, but it's the real way to win in the long run. The first mover has to do everything: educate the market, understand customers, design products, build foundations. They bear all the risks of the unknown. But the last mover walks on a path already explored, avoids potholes, and optimizes every step. They don't need to explain to customers what the product is. Customers have already been taught. They just need to do it better, or even just make fewer mistakes to capture the market. I've seen this happen so many times it's haunting. Friendster was the first social network to achieve global virality. They launched in 2002. They had millions of users in a few months. They were hailed as a revolution. They were Facebook before Facebook existed. And then they died. The website was slow, the product unstable. The management team failed to keep the creative fire alive. A few years later, Facebook appeared. No need to introduce what a social network was, they just needed to do it well, and they captured the entire world. The first mover has to open the frame, but the frame can be crooked, rushed, ill-conceived. The last mover doesn't need to rethink everything, they refine, and that's why they survive. Do you think Google was the first search engine? Before that, there was Alta Vista, InfoSec, Lycos, Excite, and all of them disappeared. Google arrived late, but they had something no one else had: PageRank, an algorithm that ranked results in a way that reflected true reliability. They didn't just redo it, they did it differently. The difference lies in the quality of the solution, not the timing of its launch. And the cruelest irony is that pioneers are often trapped by what they themselves create. They get early users but lack the capacity to serve them. They have the first product, but that product quickly becomes obsolete. They go too early, even before the market is ready to receive it. They are praised by the crowd, then forgotten by the crowd. I've worked with many founders who were obsessed with being first. They launched when the product wasn't stable. They burned money to expand before they had a sustainable model. They raised capital based on the assumption that users would be loyal, while users were merely curious. They jumped into the river before knowing how deep it was. Conversely, I've met latecomers. They were ridiculed as copycats. They weren't called game changers, but they observed, took notes, and even learned from the failures of their predecessors. They weren't rushed. They didn't crave media attention. And when they launched their product, it was stable, lean, strategic, and they won. There's a type of startup I fear most: those who treat entrepreneurship like a sprint. They rush ahead, burn energy, raise capital, make a product flashy to get into the news, to go viral. They want to win fast, very fast, but they fail to see a clear, painful truth: entrepreneurship is a marathon with no shortcuts. First movers easily fall into an invisible trap, the trap of self-delusion. They think they are the ones who get to shape the market. But in reality, they are groping in the dark. They are driven by the pressure to finish, to keep going, not to slow down, because if they slow down, they will be overtaken. Meanwhile, the latecomer observes, analyzes, waits for the pioneer to make mistakes, and then they jump in. I saw this when working with PayPal. We weren't the first to create an online payment method. Before us, there were companies like Billpent, but they were too early. Their product was clunky, poorly integrated. The user experience felt like going backward. We learned from that, not because we were smarter, but because we were patient enough not to jump into the pit like them. We didn't try to become the global payment solution immediately. We chose a small market-based sellers with clear needs, defined behavior, and no one else serving them correctly. From there, we expanded, not the other way around. People often call it a niche market strategy. I don't like the word niche. I call it a controlled step, a strategy to choose an easy-to-win spot to accumulate strength. Remember, a startup doesn't need to prove it can do many things. You just need to prove that you can do one thing exceptionally well. That's the second foundation. The final and most elusive foundation is belief. When you start a company with a long-term goal, you won't be distracted by who came first, who's famous, who raised more capital. You only care about whether you're creating long-term value, whether this model can scale, whether your team can survive after 5 years. That's why the advantage of the last mover isn't just about learning from others' mistakes. It's also about the ability to build to last asterisk, not to impress. A young founder had a great-sounding product, a video-sharing platform for doctors. Everyone called it YouTube for the medical industry. I asked, "Has anyone used it yet?" He said, "Not yet, but we're raising capital for aggressive marketing." I nodded, thinking to myself, a first mover with no direction. When you're a latecomer, you don't have the privilege of being ignorant. You're not allowed to guess, you have to be astute. Every step is the step of someone indebted to time. But that very fact makes you choose correctly. And if you're persistent enough to go the distance, you won't just survive, you'll redefine that industry. Look at Apple, they didn't make the first smartphone. There was the Nokia communicator, Palm Pilot. All called themselves smartphones, but Apple didn't compete directly. They did something completely different. The iPhone wasn't just a phone, it was a pocket computer, a music player, a camera, a browser all in one. And most importantly, they had an ecosystem. They didn't arrive first, they arrived asterisk right, and right is stronger than early. As a storyteller, I understand an unwritten rule. The compelling character isn't the one who rushes into battle first, but the one who survives it all. The most successful entrepreneurs aren't the ones mentioned first, but the ones whose products you're still using every day after 10 years. Perhaps the reason I'm telling this chapter with a more somber tone is because I've witnessed too many young people burn themselves out wanting to be the first to do something. They sacrifice time, money, reputation for a battle whose rules they don't understand. They die from speed, die from pressure, die from comparison. When instead, they could have lived longer if they knew that being late isn't scary. Arriving right asterisk is what matters. Imagine you're the last one left in your industry. All competitors have run out of battery. The market is clear, customers understand you. You have a brand, data, a team. You no longer have to fight, you build and you maintain. That's the kind of victory no newspaper praises, but it's the kind of victory that allows you to calmly watch every craze come and go, and you're still there, as solid as ever. Chapter, You Are Not a Lottery Ticket. Once I was talking to an MBA student at Stanford. He was intelligent, sharp, and had worked for several reputable investment funds. When I asked him what he wanted to do in the next 5 years, he replied, "I'm waiting to see what opportunities come along." His answer made me pause for a few seconds. It sounded logical, practical, even shrewd. But I realized that behind that waiting was a very common belief that the future is a game of probability. He wasn't the only one. Many people, even if they don't say it, live as if they're holding a lottery ticket. They choose their major, job, place to live, and even partners by calculating the probability of winning. They look for opportunities rather than creating them. They wait for the world to take shape before choosing how to react, and they think that's smart. I disagree. When you live like a lottery ticket, you surrender your ability to make decisions. You no longer ask what you want, what you believe, what you will build. You just wait to see what happens and try to optimize your reactions. I call this indefinite thinking. In indefinite thinking, you can't know what will happen, so you have to prepare for everything. You learn as much as possible, accumulate degrees, keep your options open, and don't commit too deeply to anything. It sounds wise. But it's precisely this mindset that makes millions of intelligent people live as if they're waiting for the next bus. They don't drive, they just wait. In contrast to that is definite thinking. In definite thinking, you believe that the future can be predicted, at least in part, and you can shape it. You don't ask what asterisk might asterisk happen. You ask what asterisk you will make asterisk happen. That's the mindset of those who create the world. Do you think Elon Musk started SpaceX because he thought the probability of success was high? No. He started with the conviction that humans should become a multiplanetary species. And if no one else did it, he would. He didn't need probabilities to support him, he needed a strong enough reason. Someone told me, but the world has too many variables, how can you predict it? I don't deny that. I'm not fighting against uncertainty. I'm fighting against using uncertainty as an excuse not to make decisions. If you truly believe the future is completely random, then investing in any company is the same. Starting a business is like gambling. Education is just to increase probabilities, and you don't need to create value, just be in the right place at the right time. That mindset leads to a subtle surrender. And the danger is that modern society encourages you to think that way. Look at the education system. Good students are praised not for being creative, but for completing assignments well. They don't need to think independently, just follow the template correctly. From a young age, we learn to conform, check the right boxes, fill in the correct answers. Then, upon graduation, they tell us to be creative, take risks, do something different. But they don't tell us how to abandon the lottery ticket mindset they've taught us our whole lives. I once asked a student, "Do you want to start a company?" She replied, "I'm considering it if I meet the right person with a good idea and get investment." That answer isn't wrong, but it reflects the type of person waiting for a better lottery ticket. You need to decide whether you believe you are a creator or just an observer. In the investment world, there are also two distinct mindsets. Some investors believe the market is unpredictable. They spread their money across many places, hoping a few will hit big. They call it diversification, but in reality, it's blind hope. As for me, I invest with definite conviction. I only invest when I truly believe that the company has a correct secret, a clear vision, and a team resilient enough for the long haul. I don't invest in lottery tickets. I invest in directed willpower. Over 20 years of investing in building companies, I've met all kinds of founders. But there's one type that makes me most cautious: those who speak as if they're trying to catch the market rhythm, waiting for good opportunities, playing low-risk cards. It sounds like they're carefully considering, but in reality, they don't believe in their own ideas. They lack internal, definite conviction. A team had a pretty good product and app to track sleep quality, integrated with wearables. The idea wasn't bad. But when I asked why they chose this field, they didn't talk about people, passion, or vision. They said the health industry was hot, investors liked it, and they had a first-mover advantage. They saw their company as a chip in a roulette game. And when that company failed, they weren't sad. They just regretted it like a failed investment. I don't want to invest in people who regret. I want to invest in people who grieve, because only when you feel pain does it mean you've truly placed your faith in what you're doing. It means you're living with definite conviction. When you do something because of a high probability of success, you're making decisions like an optimizing machine. But when you do something because you believe it's right, regardless of the difficulty, you're acting like a creator of the future. The difference lies in directed belief. Look at the companies that have survived through time: Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook. None of them succeeded because they picked the right time or caught a trend. They didn't win the lottery. They built models based on a unique worldview and persistently pursued it. Google was born not just from the need for another search engine, it was born from a belief: information needs to be organized. Amazon didn't just want to sell books. They believed that online shopping was the future, and they built an entire logistics system to realize it from the 1990s. The people who do that cannot be people with a lottery ticket mindset. They are the ones who see the path when the whole world is still dim. So why do so many people still choose to live like a lottery ticket? Because living with definite conviction is very hard. It requires you to give up the comfort of having many options, to take responsibility for your own beliefs, and to accept that if you fail, it's your fault, not a lack of luck. Those who live indefinitely can blame the market, investors, the team, the economic situation. Those who live with definite conviction can only blame themselves, and that's terrifying. But precisely because of that, those who live with definite conviction have true power. They don't wait, they don't look around, they act. And from that action, they create new realities. In the entrepreneurship class I once taught, a student asked, "If you could start over, which company would you choose with the highest chance of success?" I replied, "I wouldn't choose a company, I would choose a belief, and from there I would build the company around that belief." Belief, not market analysis, is the foundation of every great company. Because the market will change, technology will change, capital will change. But if you have a strong, definite conviction something you believe is true, even if the world doesn't agree, you will always have a direction to go and to keep going. You will get there. Those who live like a lottery ticket might get lucky once, but they cannot repeat success. But those who live with definite conviction, even if they fail once or twice, by the third time, they can rebuild because they have the internal equation. You are not a lottery ticket. You are the one who writes the numbers. Chapter: Chasing the Money ***. Most people say money is not as important as passion. It's a comforting phrase, a kind of background music that makes people feel that not earning much isn't a problem. But when you start building a company, truly building, you'll realize that money isn't just important, it's oxygen. Without money, you die. Mistakes can be corrected, failures can be overcome. But without cash flow, every promise becomes meaningless. However, what I want to say isn't simply, make money. What I want to say is that money is not distributed evenly. And if you don't understand its true structure, you will always be playing a game whose rules you don't know. This is a truth I've learned from my own investing process. In a portfolio of 100 startups, a single company often generates more than half of the total returns. Let me repeat that. One company out of 100 creates over 50% of the value. If you're an egalitarian, you'll feel that's wrong. You want to believe that rewards are distributed equally among hardworking people. You think that if everyone strives and contributes, the rewards will be fairly divided. But the world doesn't work that way. The world operates according to a distribution called the power law. This law states that in many systems, a small number of elements produce the majority of the results. The richest 1% own over 40% of the world's wealth. A few singers dominate the music charts. A few videos monopolize views on YouTube. A few companies capture the majority of market share in an industry. You can see that as unfair, or you can choose to understand it and play by its rules. I choose the latter. When I invested in Facebook in 2004, it wasn't yet a giant. It was small, nascent, but I saw a special factor there, network effects developing in depth, not just breadth. Facebook users didn't just log in, they were deeply engaged, they lived within it. I invested $500,000. That amount later became worth hundreds of millions. If I hadn't understood the power law, I might have evenly distributed that money across 50 companies and never had such an explosive return. And here's what you need to understand. The power law doesn't just happen in investing. It happens within the very company you build. One feature can generate 80% of the value, one customer can bring in 70% of revenue, one employee can shape the entire culture. But if you have a linear mindset, believing that everything must be balanced, even with equally divided responsibilities, you will miss out on things that have real power. I'm not saying you should be unfair. I'm saying you need to accept the world's imbalance to leverage it, rather than trying to flatten it. The problem is that most entrepreneurs don't think exponentially. They think linearly, 10% growth each month is good. They create financial projections based on the belief that everything grows steadily. But a real startup, if successful, is never steady. It explodes, by n, mutates, breaks out, is nonlinear, and you must design your company for that. A common mistake founders make is trying to do everything equally. They want their product to be beautiful, fast, cheap, flexible, secure, and loved by everyone. They think that if they're good enough, they can satisfy everything at once. But in reality, it's precisely the unevenness that creates superior results. Imagine you're building a software company. If you try to allocate resources equally to all features, you'll have an average product with no outstanding points. But if you pour 80% of your effort into the feature that 10% of users love the most and are willing to pay for, you have a chance to create something groundbreaking. Most failing companies don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because they don't dare to choose. They don't dare to discard what's ineffective, don't dare to fire underperforming employees, don't dare to reject unsuitable customers, don't dare to abandon secondary markets. They try to keep everything, and precisely because of that, they keep nothing. I once saw a company spend millions of dollars optimizing its user interface, while the only thing making users leave was slow loading speed. They focused on what was easy to do, what looked good, what could be presented well in an investor slide, instead of what truly impacted results. They invested in the surface instead of the core, and this is where understanding the power law will save you. It forces you to be extremely disciplined in choosing the right place to make your bet. Imagine you have a team of 5 founders with an egalitarian mindset. You would divide the shares equally, 20% each. Sounds fair. But what if one of them is the product creator, investment attractor, and culture builder, while the others merely assist? Is an equal split still fair? In the short term, yes. In the long term, no. Because only one person is creating the majority of the value. And if you don't see that, you'll bear the consequences when the most important person leaves because they weren't treated commensurately. I'm not encouraging unfairness. I'm encouraging allocation based on contribution, not formula. Entrepreneurship is not a place to please everyone. It's a place to put all your energy into what has the greatest impact. That's why I always ask founders, among everything you're doing, what, if successful, would make everything else unimportant? If you can't answer, you don't understand your company yet. A good founder is someone who knows how to condense value into a single point of feature, a distribution channel, a type of customer, and make it so superior that the rest automatically follows. That's exponential thinking. But there's another side to this law that you need to be prepared for. It won't be pleasant. You will invest in 10 projects and only one will succeed. You will hire 10 people and only one will be outstanding. You will try 10 campaigns and only one will bring in revenue. And when that happens, you need the discipline to dare to kill off what isn't working. Most people don't dare to do that. They continue pouring money into unprofitable products, retaining okay employees, trying to prolong marketing campaigns that haven't yielded results. They don't want to admit they were wrong. They don't want to stop midway. They want to prove that everything has value. But the value of the mediocre is not worth the power of the excellent. When I invest, I don't look for good ideas. I look for ideas that can win big. Not 3x, but 300x. Not stability, but breakthrough. And to do that, I have to dare to ignore 99% of things that sound good. The world doesn't pay you for doing many things. It pays you for doing the *right* thing. A company that lives by linear law will grow like a revenue chart in a slide deck, straight and flat. A company that lives by the power law, if successful, will create a hockey stick curve, and at its peak is something no one can copy. Live for that. Don't chase the money. Build something that money will chase. Chapter: Secrets. A good founder doesn't start with the market. They start with a secret. A secret, as I understand it, is a truth no one has discovered or no one has dared to believe. It can be as small as a change in user behavior that no one has noticed. It can be as big as a new operating model that overthrows an entire industry. But most importantly, it must be true. If you believe in something untrue, you will lose your way. If you don't believe in anything at all, you will never create anything worthwhile. I've lived through two extremes. The first extreme, believing too much in secrets. You dream, you imagine, you think you have great insight, but in reality, you're just saying what everyone already knows. You think you're different, but you're off topic. The second, more common extreme, no longer believing in secrets. Everything seems to have been discovered. Every industry has a dominant player. Every problem is being solved by someone. You think, I didn't invent the internet, I'm not Steve Jobs, I'm not Elon Musk, so how can I create anything new? And so, you stop searching. But I believe the world is still full of secrets, only they're not on the surface anymore. In the old days, secrets were easy to find. Go west, you find America. Drill into the ground, you find gold. Launch a rocket, you see the moon. But today, secrets are buried deeper. They don't reveal themselves, they have no map. They require you to think differently, and more importantly, they require you to believe that secrets still exist. Imagine you're a child. You're curious, you ask questions, you break toys to see what's inside. But as you grow up, you're taught, don't ask too many questions, don't experiment, follow instructions. And so you start thinking like everyone else. You no longer ask, why is it this way? You only ask, how can I make it better? The second question makes you good, the first question makes you creative. I'm not saying you have to invent something that changes history. I just want you to dare to believe that the unknown is real. I remember a young founder who once presented an idea for a real estate market analysis platform. When I asked, what's your secret? He replied, this market is huge and no one is doing it well. That answer isn't a secret, it's an observation. A true secret is something others overlook, even though it's right in front of them. When I invested in Facebook, I wasn't convinced by a social network for students. I was convinced by one thing: social relationships, if digitized correctly, would become a network system more powerful than any medium that had ever existed. That was a secret, because at the time, no one thought that way. There's a quiet but dangerous shift happening in modern culture. We're replacing the mindset of discovery with the mindset of improvement. People are taught how to optimize, refine, and grow, but few are taught how to seek the unknown. Look at universities. Students write essays to get good grades, not to ask new questions. Professors conduct research to be published in journals, not to uncover never-before-known truths. Businesses develop products to gain market share, not to change how people live. The secret mindset is gradually being replaced by a safety mindset. And when a society loses its ability to ask fundamental questions, it also loses its ability to truly innovate. That's why, even though we have more technology than ever, many fields remain stagnant. Education, healthcare, construction, transportation all are stagnant because people no longer believe there are any big secrets left in those areas. And you cannot discover what you do not believe exists. Compare this to the startup world. The best startups begin with a simple secret, easily overlooked yet extremely important. Airbnb started with a peculiar secret. People are willing to sleep in strangers' homes as long as they feel safe and well-reviewed. Before that, everyone thought only hotels were a reasonable option. Airbnb's idea was ridiculed, rejected, underestimated, but it was right, and therefore it won. Tesla started with a contradictory secret. Electric cars don't have to be ugly, slow, and boring. Elon Musk believed that if you design a beautiful, fast, powerful electric car, people will buy it. At the time, major electric car companies didn't believe that. But he was right, they were wrong. All true innovation begins with believing in a forgotten truth. The question is, how do you find secrets? The answer isn't to sit and think, but to observe. Ask questions, live with a certain degree of intellectual discomfort. You don't accept things as they are. You ask, why is it this way? You don't chase trends, you look where no one else is looking. You don't try to be better at the current game, you look for ways to create a new game. Secrets are often not in grand places. They are in monotonous places, in a strange purchasing habit, in an outdated process that everyone tacitly accepts, in a lull where everyone says, that's enough. Secrets don't shout, they whisper, and you only hear them if you're quiet long enough. Don't confuse secrets with good ideas. Many people have good ideas, but those ideas can often be thought of by anyone. A true secret is something you believe, but the rest of the world isn't ready to believe yet. It's lonely, and that's why very few people pursue it to the end. What is true that very few people agree with you on? If you don't have an answer, that's okay. But you must go find it, because that's the only reason for you to start a company, for you to dedicate 5, 10, 20 years of your life to a problem. Because if you have no secret to discover, you will only be a repeating copy of the old world, and the old world is enough. Build something others cannot imagine. Start with a question no one has dared to ask. Live as if secrets are still everywhere, just waiting for you to step forward. Chapter Foundations. If I could give only one piece of advice to anyone starting a company, it would be, choose your co-founder as if you're choosing your life partner. It might sound exaggerated, but I'm not saying it lightly. You can resolve disagreements with an investor. You can rehire staff. You can change markets, adjust products, even pivot the company. But if you choose the wrong co-founder, you've already planted a bomb within your corporate team. I've seen it happen not once, but dozens of times. Founders meet at a weekend hackathon, get excited, connect, write some code together, then form a company and divide the shares equally. 50-50, 33-33-33. Sounds fair. But a few months later, one person stops, the other continues, and that's when disaster begins. You cannot easily remove a co-founder from the cap table without paying a heavy price, not just legally, but emotionally in terms of trust and culture. You might think a company is an objective entity, but in reality, it's shaped by initial emotional decisions. I remember when we founded PayPal. Our team had many disagreements, but one thing held us together. We shared the same direction, and no one sat at the table just because the idea seemed profitable. We joined as committed individuals, not as people trying their luck. That made all the difference. This is what I often call initial culture. Culture isn't a slogan pasted on the wall. It's not, here we respect creativity, or everyone has a voice. It's not about letting employees wear shorts or work remotely. Culture is who asterisk you hire, who asterisk you fire, who asterisk you praise, who asterisk you give decision-making power to. And all of that is often shaped by the first 5 hires. You cannot hire lazy people and expect the company to be diligent. You cannot hire, okay, people and expect the product to be excellent. You cannot hire people who don't believe in the mission and expect them to fight with you through the years. Every mistake in the early stage will cost you 10 times more later. You can fix code, fix the interface, but it's hard to fix human psychology. Many people think, just do it first, then adjust later. That's true for product design, but wrong for organizational design. An organization is like a living organism. You cannot arbitrarily graft genes into it and expect it to grow healthy. Look at any great company, and you'll find they have a group of founders who are extremely compatible in vision, extremely diverse in skills, and extremely convinced in what they are doing. That's the indispensable trio. When you hear the word foundations, you usually think of product structure, technical infrastructure, business model. But for me, foundations are those initial moral and strategic decisions that you cannot fully undo, and no decision is as sensitive and dangerous as equity. Many young founders, in their excitement, divide equity too early, too equally, too emotionally. We're starting together, so everyone gets an equal share for fairness. Fair might be wise, but not necessarily. Because a few months later, when one person pulls out, one stops, or one works much less, you can't change the cap table with a casual conversation. It's already on paper, legalized, a boundary of power. You might not see anything in the first month, but by the second funding round, or when there's an acquisition offer, or when the company faces conflict, those fault lines will become clear. And then you can't resolve it with goodwill, you only have the law. I'm not saying you should be selfish. I'm saying you must be clear-headed. Your co-founder is someone you will argue with, disagree with, make decisions with, bear losses with, endure pressure with, and survive with for 5-10 years. If you don't choose correctly or don't dare to clarify boundaries from the start, you're not building a company, you're digging your own grave. And that grave usually explodes when you least expect it. Ask a simple question. If you were forced to do this project alone, whom would you invite to join you? Not the fun person, not the easy compromiser, but the person you trust will not give up halfway. That is the first foundation. The second foundation, the market. Many people say, do it for passion. True, but if your passion lies in a market with no demand, or a market that's too small, or a market where you can't gain a clear advantage, that passion will die of starvation. Remember, the market can teach you, react to you, help you adjust, but it doesn't forgive initial mistakes that are too big. Choose a market you deeply understand, not a hot market, not a billion-dollar market, but a market where you have a unique perspective, a secret no one has exploited. We started PayPal by serving exactly one small group, eBay sellers. This group wasn't large, but their needs were clear, their behavior defined, and no one else was serving them correctly. From there, we expanded, not the other way around. People often call it a niche market strategy. I don't like the word niche. I call it a controlled step, a strategy to choose an easy-to-win spot to accumulate strength. Remember, a startup doesn't need to prove that you can do many things. You just need to prove that you can do one thing exceptionally well. That's the second foundation. The final, and most elusive, foundation is belief. A startup isn't an idea. It's a long-term commitment to a worldview. If you don't truly believe that you're doing the right thing not just effectively, but inherently right, you'll easily waver. I'm not saying you can't change. I'm saying you should only pivot when the initial belief remains intact, only the execution was wrong. But if there isn't even a belief, you're building castles in the air. Great companies don't just survive over time, they maintain consistency in a changing era. They aren't consistent in features or design, but consistent in their reason for existence. When you have a properly built foundation, talented people will seek you out, investors will be patient with you, customers will feel something more authentic than an advertisement. But if you build wrong, everything you add afterward, no matter how beautiful, will only be makeup on a tumor. When you start right. Lay each brick as if you cannot go back and rebuild, because you truly cannot. Chapter: The Mafia Mechanism. Once I was invited to a corporate culture presentation in Silicon Valley. The presenter was a young CEO, impeccably dressed, with colorful slides, charts, and images of smiling employees in an open-plan office. He spoke about believing in diversity, 360-degree feedback processes, no meetings on Fridays, and how every employee is a leader. The entire room nodded and applauded. I didn't applaud because I knew what would happen next. A year later, his company died. Not because it ran out of money, but because the team fell apart. Talented people left, those who stayed didn't trust each other. The cultural values only existed on PowerPoint. I've seen this repeat countless times. People think that culture is something you can build after the company is big, when there's an HR department, when capital has been raised, when everything is running smoothly. But I tell you, if you don't have culture from the very beginning, you'll never have it. Culture isn't something you attach, it's something that permeates your blood from day one. At PayPal, we didn't use the word culture much, but we lived it every day, every decision. My founding team wasn't perfect. We argued fiercely. There were times we didn't like each other, but we believed in the same thing. And that created something I only later had a word for: mafia. It sounds negative, but understand it correctly. In the startup context, a mafia is a small, loyal community with its own rules, bound together by something stronger than money, stronger than any contract. We didn't need codes of conduct, we had a commitment to survival. We didn't need high salaries, we had the feeling of climbing the same boat. We didn't need retention policies, we didn't want to leave. That's the kind of connection you can't buy, you can only build it. But how do you build it? First, you recruit people not just for their skills, you recruit people who believe in what you're doing. Skills can be trained, belief cannot. A skilled person who doesn't believe will withdraw when the company faces difficulties. An average person who believes will fight when the company is near death. And sometimes, the second person is the one who holds the company together. We recruited people not based on resumes, but on conversations. I often asked, if you weren't paid for 6 months, would you still want to do this? If they hesitated, I knew they weren't who I needed. Second, you give them true ownership. At PayPal, we granted stock to all employees, not just stock options, but the feeling of co-ownership. When you own a part of the company, you behave differently, you work differently, you think differently. You don't wait for orders, you act. Third, you build an almost insane belief that we are doing something bigger than ourselves. Every mafia has a creed. For a startup, that creed isn't "we're going to make a lot of money," but "we are changing a part of the world and no one but us can do it." That belief might sound arrogant. And yes, if you don't have a bit of arrogance, you can't do great things. If you don't believe you're special, you won't dare to do what no one else has done. Hiring the right people isn't enough. You must dare to eliminate the wrong people. This is something many founders don't dare to do. They turn a blind eye to people who are not too bad, also diligent, reasonable. They fear breaking harmony, they fear creating tension. They think it will surely improve. But the truth is, unsuitable people won't fix themselves. They dilute the culture, and that dilution is a sweet poison. No one sees it immediately, but everyone gets infected. A strong culture isn't where everyone is happy. A strong culture is where those who don't fit will feel uncomfortable and leave on their own. I once witnessed an excellent engineer being fired, not because he was incompetent, but because he didn't share the product vision. He considered users stupid. He wrote code as if users had to learn how to understand it. He was skilled, but not right for the team. Keeping him would have been easy, but keeping him would have been a betrayal of the company's culture. And if you betray it once, you'll betray it a second time. Remember, culture isn't what you write down, it's what you tolerate. If you tolerate laziness, your company becomes a place where laziness is okay. If you tolerate cynicism, your company will be steeped in cynicism. If you tolerate people who don't believe in what you're doing, you've disarmed yourself. A mafia lives by honor. And in a startup, honor lies in the consistency between words and actions. Many people ask me, so, do you need to build a professional company culture from the start? I laugh. You don't need to be professional, you need to be real. Every great startup I've known started like a cult. Not because they were extremist, but because they believed in something others didn't yet believe, and they believed enough to dare to act, dare to refuse, dare to keep going even without anyone's support. That's an energy you can't fake. Early Facebook only hired through personal referrals. There was no HR process, no diversity standards. They chose people who believed, people willing to live and die for the vision. From that, they created an ecosystem that was not just a product, but an ideology. We were the same at PayPal. Some said, "What kind of company is this, full of weirdos, no one alike but acting like brothers?" I said, "That's not accidental, that's by design." We wanted to build a team of people who, years later, whether the company succeeded or not, we would still be willing to work with each other again. And history proved it. After PayPal, many in the founding team went on to create other great companies: YouTube, LinkedIn, Palantir, SpaceX, Y Combinator. People called it the PayPal Mafia. But I believe that mafia wasn't born because we were smarter, but because we were real in the days when we had nothing. And when you've lived like that, you'll recognize who you can rebuild an empire with. Remember, culture isn't something you attach when you're big. It's the core. And if that core is strong enough, you don't just build a company, you build a community, a network, an indestructible ecosystem. You build a mafia without needing to hide its face. A mafia that believes in the same thing and is willing to live and die for it. Chapter: If you build a product, customers will come. I once sat at a meeting table, listening to a young engineer whom I highly respected talk about the product he was building. It was truly excellent. He spoke almost trembling with pride. The interface was smooth, the speed fast, the functions clear. No competitor did it so well. I nodded. You're not wrong. I tried it, and indeed, every detail was exquisite. His team had spent a year painstakingly refining every line. Even the send button icon was carefully considered for its color according to visual ratios. Then I asked, who is using it? He hesitated. Not many right now, but I'm sure once people know about it, it will spread quickly because it's good. I sighed. Not out of disappointment, but because I had heard that line too many times. The truth is, there are millions of good products in the world, and most of them die prematurely, not because they're bad, but because no one knows they exist. The problem isn't quality, it's the naive belief that quality will spread on its own. It won't. We live in an overloaded world. People are bombarded with hundreds of pieces of information every day. No one has time to dig around to see if what you've made is refined. They will only see it if you force them to see it. And that's when you realize a product can't walk on its own. You have to push it out. How? Through distribution. And distribution isn't a minor detail. It doesn't come later. It can't be treated like the shy younger sibling of product development. Distribution is the other half of the company. If the product is the lungs, distribution is the blood. Without blood, the lungs won't keep you alive. At PayPal, we once made that mistake. We thought, we have the best technology, a simple, user-friendly interface faster than any other system, so users will just come. No one came. We had a perfect ship, but it was anchored in the desert. And only then did we realize either we figure out how to get people's attention or we die. So we did something no one on the engineering team ever wanted to do. We paid to acquire users. It sounds crude, it sounds like marketing. But it was thanks to the campaign $10 for each sign-up, another $10 if you invited friends that we achieved our initial growth speed. Not because the product was bad, but because we finally accepted that to survive, you have to learn how to sell. Many engineers hate the word sales. They think it's dirty, noisy, lacking intellectual substance. They want to live in a world where value is naturally recognized. But this world doesn't operate that way. It doesn't reward quiet excellence. It rewards appearing at the right time, in the right way, to the right people. I once sat with a young founder who had just raised $500,000. His product was a task management tool for small teams. I asked, "What's your distribution strategy?" He replied, "I'll launch on Product Hunt. Hopefully it gets a lot of upvotes." I nodded, saying nothing. I knew that hope would fade within 3 days. If your distribution strategy relies on hope, you've lost from the start. Because true distribution isn't based on luck, it's based on a system. The question isn't, is the product good? The question is, who will use it first? Where will they hear about it? Why will they care? Who will they tell? Why will that person believe? If you don't have clear answers for that chain, you're walking in a fog. Imagine you build a restaurant in the middle of a forest. Delicious food, skilled chef, clean tables, but no road to it, no signposts, no lights, no one knows where you are. You don't need more recipes, you need a map and streetlights. And someone standing at the edge of the forest shouting, "There's something here you have to try." Let me tell you a paradoxical story. In 2008, Dropbox was born. A simple, clean, almost invisible file synchronization tool. No massive media campaigns, no super expensive ads, no buying newspaper space, no hiring consultants. They just did one thing, they integrated distribution into the product itself. Every time you shared Dropbox with someone else, both you and the other person received free storage space. Sounds simple, right? But that was self-sustaining distribution. The product was both a tool and a messenger. Dropbox didn't advertise, it spread, and they didn't accidentally stumble upon that. They designed it from the beginning. That's the lesson I want you to remember. Good distribution is embedded in the product's DNA, not added on afterward. But depending on the product, the distribution structure must be different. If you're building a consumer app, you need horizontal virality. users sharing with users like WeChat, like TikTok. There, each new user isn't just a customer, but also a distribution channel. But if you're selling to businesses, you need vertical distribution. You can't wait for virality. You have to negotiate, knock on doors, persuade individuals, and the people you need to persuade aren't engineers, but the ones who sign contracts. That's why successful B2B companies always have sales teams as strong as steel. Sales isn't an auxiliary cost, it's the backbone. I once asked the CEO of a SaaS company, "Who is the main salesperson in the company?" He said, "I hire a sales office." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Wrong. The main salesperson must be *U**. A founder cannot escape the role of distribution. You can hire engineers, you can hire lawyers, but you cannot hire someone to truly convey your own conviction. Distribution is where you tell the world, "This is what I believe, and I want you to believe it with me." If you can't do that, you shouldn't be doing a startup. Look at the most successful companies. Amazon distributes through the world's largest logistics system. Facebook distributes through its users and personalized algorithms. Palantir distributes through deep collaborative projects with governments and large corporations. Each company has a different type of distribution, but the common thread is that it was thought of from day one. You can't build a product and then ask, "How do I sell this?" You have to build the product so it can be sold. That means, who pays for this? How do they hear about it? Who do they tell? Is there a reason for them to come back? Does anyone else benefit when this product spreads? If you don't have answers to these questions, stop, rethink, or you're building something no one will find. Distribution isn't about turning up the volume. Distribution is about building the road. It can be quiet, it can be unsexy, but if you do it right, it becomes an unstoppable force. I once met a startup with amazing technology, using machine learning to optimize delivery schedules. Top engineering team, stable product, but they failed. Why? Because their target customers' logistics companies didn't know who they were. They had no sales team, no industry connections, no one to spread the word, and no one buys what they don't see. Meanwhile, another company with inferior technology, but whose CEO was a former operations director at a major delivery corporation. He had connections, people who trusted him, people who listened. And so he won. Sometimes you don't need a perfect product, you just need the first person to believe, and you have to be the one to sell that. Not because you're a good speaker, but because you believe so deeply that others can't help but listen. Startups don't die from a lack of technology, they die from having technology that no one knows about. Avoid that death. Don't live as if the world will find you. Live as if you are the only one who can bring that product into the light. Because, in fact, you are. Chapter: Humans and Machines. I once had a friend, an engineer in Silicon Valley, highly skilled, very principled, and with an unshakable belief: machines will replace everything. He said it as if reading a simple line of code, without emotion, without doubt. He believed that once artificial intelligence crossed a certain threshold, we humans would no longer be the center of any system. I didn't laugh because I knew he wasn't joking. You can see that belief creeping in everywhere. You walk into a tech conference and people talk about automation as the greatest promise. Robots will work better. Algorithms will make more accurate decisions. Artificial intelligence will design, compose music, diagnose diseases, trade financially. They no longer say could, they say when. Once, I heard an investor state directly, "We don't invest in any model that still relies on human factors." Listen closely. Humans are seen as unstable variables in the system. And I began to wonder, if so, where are we heading? Look around and you'll see two extremes. On one side, those who worship machines. They believe that the fewer humans in a system, the more perfect the system. They see automation as the only solution. They dream of a world where every process is optimized, every decision is probabilistic, every emotion is labeled data. On the other side, those who are afraid. They see technology as an alien force, threatening jobs, stealing opportunities, killing industries that once sustained entire communities. They look at AI like Frankenstein, like Skynet. The problem is, both sides are wrong because both sides are extreme. In reality, most of the most successful systems lie in the middle. They are neither cold machines nor stages exclusively for humans. They are a marriage of engineering and emotion, of logic and intuition. Take a simple example, Google search. A machine, right? An algorithm. But do you know what makes Google Google? It's human behavior. Every result is ranked not just based on engineering, but on how users respond. Where you click, how long you stay, whether you go back to search for something else, all of it is fed into the algorithm. Google doesn't replace users, Google uses asterisk users. That's the model I call machines augmenting humans, and it's the only way technology won't become alienating. I once met a startup that made recruitment software. The idea was to use AI to scan resumes, rank candidates, and eventually even replace human interviewers. I asked, "Do you have any data to prove that your algorithms choose better candidates than humans?" They said, "Not yet, but it's consistent." At that moment, I understood they wouldn't go far. And indeed, a year later, they died. The problem wasn't that the technology was poor, but that they tried to eliminate humans instead of empowering them. Every good recruiter knows there are things that aren't on a resume, not in a score, not in language. It's how someone walks into a room, how they sit, how they listen, how they hesitate at the right moment or laugh at the wrong time. Machines don't see those things, or if they do, they don't understand them. And this is what I've learned after many years. Automation is not the goal. The goal is to accelerate what's good without losing what's human. Look at PayPal. At that time, many companies tried to build automated payment systems, but created cold, impersonal, easily exploited experiences. We, on the other hand, retained the human element at the most crucial touchpoints. We had an automated system for fraud detection, but always let humans make the final decision. We sent confirmation emails, but wrote them as one person writing to another, not a machine sending to a crowd. We didn't want users to think, "This is amazing technology." We wanted them to feel, "This helps me feel safe." And a feeling of safety cannot be programmed, it must be delivered. The biggest problem with tech companies today isn't a lack of technology, but forgetting for whom asterisk they build that technology. In the best systems I've seen, there's always a subtle but clear boundary. Machines handle the stable parts, humans handle the special parts. Imagine you get into an Uber. The algorithm locates the driver, calculates the fare, optimizes the route. But what makes you rate 5 stars is when the driver asks if you want the window open, tells you a funny story, or stays silent at the right time, small details that cannot be replaced by code. Or look at Airbnb. They have an entire system for verification, ratings, feedback. But the reason you come back is still the experience with the host, the feeling of being in a real place, not an anonymous hotel. Those things don't happen naturally, they need intentional design. People often ask me, "So, should we be afraid of artificial intelligence?" I say, fear is the wrong question. The right question is, what will we use it for? If you use it to replace humans, you will be pitted against your own customers. If you use it to deepen what humans already do well, you will be in partnership with them. And that's the only way technology becomes human. I believe the future lies not in either extreme, not all human, not all machine, but in systems where humans and machines empower each other. Machines learn from data, humans learn from paradox. Machines excel at repetition, humans excel at disruption. Machines perform well when the question is clear, humans shine when the question has never been asked. And so, when you build a company, ask, which parts should be left to machines? Which parts absolutely must be human? If you don't have an answer, perhaps you don't truly understand what you're building. Let technology elevate humans, not replace them. Because the world doesn't need more machines. It needs more humans who dare to use technology to live authentically. Chapter: The Green Business Trend. There was a time when I couldn't walk into any pitching session in Silicon Valley without hearing the word sustainability. Every startup had a green slide. Every founder said, "We're creating a more sustainable world." Every product was eco-friendly. Every model reduced carbon emissions. Every follow-up email had a quote from Al Gore. It sounded great, noble, trendy, and most of them didn't survive past their second year. That's the paradox I want to discuss in this chapter. You can be highly ethical and still fail completely. You can have a grand mission, but if your business model isn't sound, you won't live long enough to fulfill that mission. People like to say they want to do good and get rich at the same time. I don't object, I just want to ask, do you have a plan to make both happen, or are you just hoping? Let me tell you about a startup once called the Tesla of organic food. It was a company that delivered organic food to homes, committed to no plastic bags, no internal combustion vehicles, no fossil fuels in any part of its operation. They were praised, featured in newspapers, lauded, and even received funding from social impact investment funds. And then they went bankrupt quietly, without a struggle or fanfare. Why? Because their logistics costs were 3 times higher than competitors. Because they tried to be both good for the earth and offer free shipping. Because they did everything right except financially. And here's what you need to understand. Startups aren't rewarded for good intentions. Startups survive thanks to efficiently operating systems. I know this sounds harsh, but I'm not writing for your comfort. I'm writing so you have a real chance to change the world without dying from self-righteousness. Let's look at the essence of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is about creating new value. New value isn't necessarily something good for the planet. New value is something that solves a real problem, significantly better than the current way. If you can do that, you can help the planet in the most sustainable way, by surviving, growing, expanding, and attracting people unlike yourself into the same model. But if you start with, "We want to save the world," and have no way to get the product into the hands of ordinary people at an acceptable price, you're building a beautiful church in the desert. No one comes, no one knows, no one changes, and you'll collapse from thirst in your own ethical illusion. Let me say this bluntly. Every environmental mission is meaningless if your company doesn't exist long enough to achieve it. Imagine you're a well-intentioned person. You want to make a product to replace plastic. You have a PhD, a passion for prototyping. You start a company, raise capital, produce the first batch, and then you realize the cost is 3 times higher than regular plastic. Customers say, "Great, but too expensive." You lower the price and operate at a loss. You seek grants, wasting time. You hope the government will enact supporting laws, they don't. You run out of money, you die. Who benefits from that death? No one, except for a few articles praising your spirit as a romantic monument. But this planet doesn't need more monuments. It needs systems that can change human behavior on a large scale. And to do that, you have to think like an engineer, a distributor, a realist, not a poet. Look at Tesla. They didn't start with cheap cars. They started with expensive cars to have profit margins to survive. Then from those profits, they built factories, expanded, reduced costs, and step by step, they made clean products mainstream. Not out of ethics, but because they were better. That's a real victory, when people who don't care about emissions still choose an electric car because it's more powerful, cheaper, and more convenient. You want to change behavior. Don't preach, redesign the choice. I once met a startup that made recycled building materials. They didn't talk much about saving the planet. They only talked about being 17% cheaper, 23% lighter, and stronger than traditional concrete. As a result, they signed contracts with 2 affordable housing chains. No need for speeches, no need for calls to action. Their products simply fit reality. That's the spirit you need to bring when you want to build a green business. Don't try to change the world by lecturing it. Change it by deeply understanding how the current system operates and inserting yourself at the crucial leverage points. You don't need to be more ethical than others. You need to be smarter at the intersection of ethics and efficiency. Remember this, a startup is not obligated to become a social movement. A startup is obligated to create sustainable value and exist to maintain that value. Want to do the right thing? Excellent. But doing the right thing profitably is what will spread. Start with a specific problem. No need for flowery words, no need to promise to transform the world. Just solve a specific problem for a specific group in a way that is both ethical and feasible. From there, you will have money. From money, you will have leverage. From leverage, you can change the system. And when you do that, you no longer have to say, "I am a green business." Others will say it for you. And that's when you know you're doing something real. Chapter: The Founder's Paradox. I've met many startup founders. Some were intelligent, some brilliant, some decisive, resourceful, smooth-talking. But the person I respected most was quiet, contemplative, and hard to approach, because he carried a paradox within him, just arrogant enough to believe he could change the world, yet humble enough to know he could be wrong at every step. And it's not easy to live with both of those things at once. You can be a dreamer or a pragmatist. You can be an inspirer or a detail-oriented controller. You can be a visionary leader or an engineer focused on every line of code. But when you are the founder, you have to be all of these things, and you have to learn to live with that contradiction every day. Imagine, you tell the world that the product you're creating will change the behavior of millions of people. You raise capital based on a vision that even you sometimes don't dare to believe is real. You hire people smarter than you, then have to be their boss. You're lauded by the press as a genius, then crushed when a small feature fails. And throughout that entire process, you simultaneously have to maintain faith and doubt yourself. That's paradox number 1. Paradox number 2 is that you have to build a culture around your own undefined self. Sounds vague? Let me be clearer. Every company bears the imprint of its founder. But you, at the beginning, are an incomplete entity. You're full of ideals but lack testing. You're full of passion but lack experience. You are both the source of energy and the weakness of the very system you create. And the hardest part is, you can't hide anywhere. Every decision you avoid will come back to find you. Every personality flaw you have will surface in the company culture. Every panic attack you conceal will leak into every meeting. A startup doesn't duplicate, it amplifies you. And if you don't understand yourself, you won't understand what you're building. I've seen companies die not because of a wrong model, but because the founder's own fears, ego, or unresolved emotions dragged the entire system down. People often assume startups die from lack of funding or market, but the deeper truth is that many startups die because the founder can't stand themselves, can't stand the loneliness, can't stand the feeling of being doubted, can't stand having to say, "I don't know," can't stand becoming an icon when they're panicking inside. I know that feeling. I once sat alone in the night, not because the company was about to die, but because I wasn't sure I still wanted to live the life the company demanded. And that is the greatest paradox of a founder. You create a machine that, at some point, might consume you. I once asked a veteran founder, "What moment made you want to give up most?" He didn't talk about the time the company was on the verge of bankruptcy, nor the time he was smeared by the media. He simply said, "It was when I realized I had created something that I no longer recognized myself." He said it very gently, without anger, without drama, just the cold truth of someone who had gradually sacrificed himself for a dream, then one day woke up and didn't find himself in that dream anymore. And that leads me to the final truth. Entrepreneurship isn't just about creating a company, it's an extreme personal experiment, a laboratory where you confront yourself in a state where there's nowhere to hide. Every failure is a test of faith, every success is a challenge to the ego. Founders don't die from making mistakes, they die from not being able to handle the emotions that come with those mistakes. They don't collapse from pressure, they collapse from an unnamed loneliness. You can raise millions of dollars, be featured on magazine covers, sign contracts with large corporations, and still feel empty when you go to bed. You can laugh in a meeting, then wonder afterward if you're deceiving yourself. To build a true company, you must know who you are when you have nothing, when the product isn't launched, when no one believes you, when you wake up and only one thing makes you get out of bed. The belief that even if no one understands, what you are doing is still right. But to live with that belief, you must make peace with yourself. You must learn not to need others' approval. Learn to look at bad numbers without fear. Learn to apologize to your team when you're wrong without losing leadership. Learn not to turn the company into a place to heal personal insecurities. And if you can do that, something strange will happen. The company begins to reflect the best version of you. Not the perfect version, but the honest version, brave enough not to play any role. And when you live like that, talented people will come. Not because you have a lot of money, but because they want to work in an environment where authenticity is valued. They will trust you because you have learned to trust yourself without being consumed by ego. And that is the founder's final paradox. You must become bigger than yourself without losing yourself. You must lead others but not let them become your clones. You must dare to step out without needing to stand on stage. Because when you don't need to prove who you are, you can truly create something meaningful. Thank you for accompanying me to the end of this journey through *0 to 1*. Perhaps you are not just listening to a summary, you are quietly digging into questions that are not easily answered. How to truly create something new? Is there a formula to escape repetition? And if the future has never existed, how do we step into it with our own 2 feet, by listening not just with our ears, but with our intuition? You have confirmed one thing. You are not satisfied with the old models, and that, however small, is a weighty beginning. This book doesn't promise you success, but it demands courage. Courage not to follow trends, not to follow the crowd, not to start a business just to survive, but to build something that others, even if they oppose it, cannot ignore. If this content makes you think of a new idea, reevaluate an old assumption, or simply pause for 3 seconds to ask yourself if you're copying someone, then the dialogue between you and me has truly taken place. Now, I want to hear back from you. Please leave your review or thoughts on this book in any way you wish. A sentence, a paragraph, a paradox, or something you disagree with. No need for it to be pretty, just real. Because I believe the deepest listening begins when others dare to say what they think without censorship. If the ideas in *0 to 1* spark something in you, please suggest other books you'd like me to recount in this way. Not superficially, not without emotion, not borrowing anyone's words. I hope in our next encounter, we will together step from 1 to 2 not by numbers, but by a profound inner shift within you.